thank you for joining us for the next session, which is going to be on exploring new pathways for ending violence against women and girls. This session will be moderated by Maggie Gatora Banda, who is the Executive Director for the Women's Legal Resource Center, with opening remarks from Elizabeth Nyamayaro, who is a humanitarian and the former UN Senior Advisor on Gender Equality. However, due to some slight technical difficulties, which our tech team is currently working to fix, we will hear from Elizabeth as we close this session. And for now, we will have remarks from Mr. Asan Golowa, who is the Country Director for Action Aid Malawi.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. My name is Asan Golowa. I'm the Executive Director for Action Aid Malawi. Dr. Nyarazai Gumbozanda, who is the African Union Goodwill Ambassador to end child marriage, but who is also the Global Board Chairperson for Action Aid. Mr. Kwame Dibara, who is the Chief Executive for Trocaire, the former UN Senior Gender Advisor, Elizabeth Nyamayaro, Honorable Bogolo Kenewendo, former Minister of Investment and Trade in Botswana and Managing Director of Kenewendo Advisory, Mrs. Pamela Kuwari, who is National Director for Civil Society Agriculture Network in Malawi, and all other dear listeners and those on the call. On behalf of the organizers of the first annual African Gender Equality Conference, I'm pleased to represent the Feminist Macroeconomic Alliance, Malawi, to welcome all of you to this plenary session number 3, which is titled Leading the Way, Investing in Women for Equitable Growth. This is the 3rd session of the first annual Gender Equality Conference, which is a conference organized locally by the Minister of Gender, Community Development and Social Welfare in Malawi, for Equality and Feminist Microeconomics Alliance Malawi, a network that is comprising of Action Aid Malawi, Human Rights Resource Center, Activista Malawi, NGO Gender Coordination Network, and MHub. And we have had support from various regional development partners and organizations, including Trocaire, who are on the conference as well. And so many others that are so numerous to mention. We really appreciate their involvement pre this conference. In the context of COVID-19, Africa Gender Conference 2021 is very vital and very important. Broadcasted from Lilongwe here in Malawi, with over 3,000 delegates across Africa and beyond listening to this conference. The objectives of the conference are, number 1, we are taking stock. We are celebrating progress made towards the advancing of gender equality 26 years post the Beijing conference. Secondly, this conference is leading the way. We are crowdsourcing the development of homegrown solutions to addressing existing inequalities exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, this conference will try to build the future by charting new pathways to attaining gender equal societies that are resilient to future crises. So we hope that by the end of the meeting, these 3 objectives will be met. The session we're in now is number 3, is the 3rd session of the first annual Africa Gender Equality Conference. Let me therefore take this opportunity to thank Trocaire for organizing and providing financial support for this high-level plenary session, which, as I said, is called Leading the Way, Investing in Women for Equitable Growth. Once again, thank you to all of you for attending, and we wish you a very fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the wonderful remarks, Mr. Asan Goloa, who is the Country Director for ActionAid Malawi. Now, before I invite Maggie to moderate the session, we will hear the voices from the field on women leadership in agriculture.
Ndachokera kwa Marola, grupu Marola, STA Marola, boma la Baraka. Ziko mwambiri, nchile mene ndimagwira ine, ndi ya ulimi. Imene ndimatha kulima, oti ndipezere ndalama. Maga so ndimapanga gulu, amabanki ma SHG, lamene ndimatopezera mu chithandizo, chopezera mu ndalama. Ndikapeza ndalama zija ndimapeza oti ndithandiza pakhomo panga, mwina ana kumathandiza fizi, ndoleka chithandizo sikakusowa kwambiri kumubanga. Zinthu ziwiri zimenezi zabweretsa mavuto kwambiri pakhomo panga, chifukwa choti tipite ku nkhani ya kusintha kwa nyengo. Kalekale amakolo athu amatuza kuti mvula ikayamba simadula msanga, panopa ikumatha kuyamba mwachangu kudula mofulumira, choncho kupeza chakudya chokwanira tikulephera. Komanso ndi mmene yagwera mvula chaka chino, imagwa mvula molumphalumpha, moti dzimanga zambiri zawonongeka chifukwa kunagwati dzirombo chimene timati mbuzi zawononga kwambiri chakudya. Nde kusintha kwa nyengo kwatipatsa fema. Tikapita ku nkhani ya COVID ndizoti timapanga ma business ching'ono ngati ine timapanga ma business omayenda m'misika kaya kubanda kuti kumene kuja kuti kulephera kuti tipite kuti tikafikire facho kuti boma likukana kuti tisamakhale pagulu. Nde tikapita mene kuja timakhala gulu ndithu lofuna kugula malonda. Nde chifukwa chakuchuluka kwa anthu ndi kuchepa kwa anthu mtero tikukanika kugulitsa malonda moti miyoyo yathu yasintha kwambiri yabwereranso mbuyo. Pamene timembekeza kuti mwina tidzichukulu koma chifukwa chakusintha chifukwa cha matenda amene anthu fe tabwerera mbuyo kwambiri. Kwambiri ife azimayi timafuna ulimi ngati wachimanga, komanso pagulu boma litatithandizira kutipatsa ngati ngongole ya ziweto zoti tidzitha kusamala nkupatsana. Chifukwa choti chiweto chija chikachita bwino ngati ulimi wachimanga wativuta ka ulimi uliwonse wativuta, tikhoza kutenga chiweto chija kuthandizikira pakhomo, ndiyoti sitingakhale azimayi obwerera mbuyo. Atatithandizira ndithu kutipatsanso misika, zinthu zimene zozo zomwe angatipatsezo za ziweto zoti tidzitha kugulitsa msika okhazikika, ndiye kuti moyo wathu ukhoza kupita patsogolo.
Dzina langa ndine Mwayiwawo Kaperewera Makola, ndimakhala m'mudzi mwa Matola, grupu VHD mani Matola, STA Matola. Ntchito zimene ndimagwira pothandizira kutukula moyo komanso dziko la Malawi ndi dera, ndimapanga ulimi ndipo ulimi umenewu ndimautenga kukhala business. Ulimi umene ndimapanga ulimi osiyanasiyana, pali ulimi wa mbewu komanso ulimi wa ziweto, pali ulimi wa mvula komanso ulimi wa nthirira umene timalima nthawi ya chilimwe. Komanso timapanga ati ma business ng'ono kuphatikizapo ma backyard garden amene timadzala mbewu za masamba, zimenezo zimandithandizira kupeza kandalama kamene kamathandizira moyo wa tsiku ndi tsiku komanso kutukula dziko. Komanso ndalama zimenezo zimandithandizira kukasungitsa ku banki kumene timasungitsa komanso kubweretsana ndalama kuti tithandizire pa moyo wathu wa tsiku ndi tsiku kutukula makomo athu, dera lathu komanso dziko lathu. Ndizoonadi kusintha kwa nyengo kwabweretsa mavuto. Maka ndiyambe kumbali ya nkhani ya ulimi, chifukwa cha kusintha kwa nyengo kupezeka kuti tikumakolola zinthu zochepa chifukwa choti mvula sikumabwera monga mmene inenera kubwerera. Komabe chifukwa choti pa umunthu sitenera kungokhala chete, boma komanso mabungwe amatipatsa maupangiri amene tingathe kugwiritsa ntchito kuti ngakhale pali vuto la kusintha kwa nyengo tithebe kupeza njira zimene tingatsate pofuna kuchepetsa ululu umene tikumana nawo pa nkhani ya kusintha kwa nyengo, zimene zikupangitsa kuti tidzitha kutsatira ulimi wa makono umene timatha kukololabe kangachepe kuti tithebe kusuntha masiku angapo ngakhale tikumana ndi vuto la kusintha kwa nyengo.
Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to join you today. Thank you to the government of Malawi and partners
Once again, we see how COVID-19 has affected all of our lives in different sectors. And from the women who have shared their stories with us here, we can see how the pandemic has affected the agriculture sector, and particularly women in agriculture. I will now invite Maggie Gatora-Banda to moderate our plenary on pathways for ending violence against women and girls. Maggie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I'll be your moderator for this session, and our theme that is going to guide us is Leading the Way, Investing in Women for Equitable Growth. Also, just to mention that the session is being sponsored and hosted by Trocaire with support from the Climate Change Challenge program in Malawi. So during the next 2 hours, we'll be hearing from women leaders from different fields, and we'll be exploring the key challenges women face in accessing financial services, therefore also calling for the need for gendered financial investment. We'll also listen, as we have also listened to messages from Malawian women farmers who produce 70% of our food, and yet they carry out informal work in a largely gender-blind sector. As most of our countries rely on agriculture, we'll also be hearing about women in agriculture and how they are adapting to climate change and what needs to be done to invest in all women for equitable growth. I think some of the voices we have already listened to. At this point, allow me to introduce members of the panel that we are going to have this morning. Let me introduce Honorable Bohoro Kenewendo. Honorable Kenewendo is a former Minister of Investment and Trade in Botswana and also a Managing Director of Kenewendo Advisory. She's an African economist. She's a non-resident fellow at the Center for Global Development. Honorable Kenewendo is also a member of the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation and Group on Financing for Development. She's also a member of the World Economic Forum and also a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. She's also a co-founder and chairperson of Molaya Gos Trust and sits on several corporate boards. She's an advocate for the empowerment and protection of children and women. A round of applause for her, please. We also have Dr. Nyarazai Gumbozwanda. She is the African Union Goodwill Ambassador to end child marriage, and she's also Global Board Chairperson of Action Aid. She's a human rights lawyer and Chief Executive for Rosario Memorial Trust. Dr. Nyarazai Gumbozwanda has also served as Secretary General of the World Young Women's Christians Movement, which is found in 120 countries and reaching out to 25 million women and girls, a role that she served from 2007 to 2016. She has also served in the United Nations in various roles, focusing on women and children's rights for almost 10 years through UNIFEM, which is now called UN Women, and also UNICEF. She was appointed by the UN Secretary General and served in the UN Commission on Information and Accountability on Women and Children's Health. She has extensive experience of work around adolescent health and HIV, women's rights, but also violence against women and property rights. She has also been instrumental on work around women, peace and security in the region, and is renowned for advocacy at the continental level on the African Protocol on Women's Rights and the campaign to end child marriage. She served as the chair of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women, Geneva, and was recently appointed to the steering committee for the Gender is My Agenda campaign. She has also served since 2015 as a chair of Action Aid International Board. She has received so many awards for her work over the years. And recently, she launched a special initiative called the Girls Opportunity Fund, which enables her to further her cause and commitment to education and health for girls in rural communities. A round of applause for her, please. Another panelist that we have is Quiver Dibara. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Trocaire. Quiver has held this position since October 2018. Trocaire is an Irish NGO working in partnership with local development and humanitarian actors to support people and communities to tackle the root causes of poverty, injustice, and violence. Trocaire works in up to 20 fragile countries in the world. She also worked as a country director for Concern Worldwide in Malawi from 2015 to 2018. Prior to that, Quiver worked in a number of roles in Trocaire, including director of Trocaire's International Division, assistant regional manager for Southern Africa, and policy and advocacy coordinator. She has a Bachelor of Arts in International Marketing from Dublin City University and a Master's in Development Studies from University College Dublin. She was given an award from Dublin City University in 2020 in recognition of her contribution towards social development. Quiver is a strategic leader with a deep commitment to social justice, human rights, and equality. Currently, she lives in Dublin, Ireland, with her family. A round of applause for her, please. And we also have Ms. Pamela Kuwali. She is the Chief Executive Officer of the Civil Society Agriculture Network in Malawi. In her role, she has successfully transformed SisterNet from an impactful network currently recognized by government, development partners, and stakeholders. She's also influential in agriculture policy space. She's leading 70 civil society organizations in driving an agricultural transformation policy advocacy agenda that focuses on improving access to markets, livestock, and aquaculture development. Pamela is the Malawi node host for Food, Agriculture, Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network in Malawi. She also serves in various boards in the country and also policy technical committees, including the Africa Council for Tourism and Trade, and she also co-chairs National Agriculture Investment Plan, Technical Working Group on Policy Institutions and Coordination as a representative of CSO. With over 20 years experience in development and governance, Pamela has held several leadership and program management positions with a number of international organizations, including the National Democratic Institution, UN World Food Programme, the US Embassy in Malawi, and she holds a master's degree in public administration and development from University of Birmingham, UK. She has several credentials in public diplomacy from the State Department Foreign Service Institute and a fellow of Vital Voices Women in Public Policy Program by Kennedy School of Government, University of Harvard. A round of applause for Pamela. At this point, allow me to call upon Honorable Bohoro Kenewando. She's going to share more about gendered financial investments. I think just to say that globally, we find that women face greater barriers when it comes to access to financial services as we compare to men. For women in the low income areas, low income populations and countries, these barriers are worse. At this point, I wanted us to tap from the experience that Honorable Bohoro Kenewando has in dealing with issues of investment, financial access for women. Honorable Bohoro, I hope she's here online.
I am. A very good morning to everyone.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, so talking from your own experience, what are
Right.
some of the constraints that hinder women to meaningfully engage and contribute to financial investments in the region? And I think in this case, we're talking about SADC, we're also talking about the Africa region.
Yes, thank you very much, Matthew, for all the introductions. And again, I'll just say protocol has been observed so that we don't spend too much time on that. And in addition to that, a happy International Women's Month to all the women on this panel, and really to all the allies. Thank you for supporting women's causes in this century and hopefully forward. So some of the issues that we have that are restricting women's participation, not just in financial inclusion, but participation broadly in the economy, are legislative, regulatory, and they're cultural as well. And we find that the first and foremost issues that we should deal with are regulatory, because you can control those a lot easier. They just take a political will and you take them to parliament and you work on those and you change them. The a lot harder ones are those that are cultural, that need a lot of time in ironing out and finessing and ensuring that the society thinks a lot differently about how women are supposed to participate in the economy. Now, when I was a minister, we changed quite a couple of laws to ensure that first there's an equal opportunity of access to everyone. So the first thing is to ensure that the environment is enabling for everyone. Because if you look at historical issues here legislatively, you find that women in the sub-region haven't been able to inherit land. They haven't been able to go to a bank to take loans on themselves when they are married. And you will find that even by regulation-wise, in some countries, they are unable to own land. Now, these are regulatory issues that can easily be changed. And they have in the past not allowed women to acquire assets, because you can't have access to formal financial access if you do not have that collateral. You can't have access to formal financial services if you do not, if you are unable to sign on your own. So these are issues that have really in the past, and to some extent even now, hindered women's participation in the economy. And culturally, you find that there's still some social mobility issues. In some cultures, women are not allowed to travel by themselves. Women are not allowed to be seen by themselves in public. And those are still very restrictive, because you can't always wait for someone to take you to a bank or to take you to what we call financial societies in order for you to effectively participate or tap into the services that are being offered. So when I talk about regulatory and cultural issues, there's also another layer that we have to look at that hinders women's financial participation, which is access. How far are they from the financial services providers, which is also, are the programs tailored to the women? So now we start to talk about the depth of the financial services that are being provided. Does that really meet the needs of the women, particularly in the sub-region? So those are some of the issues there.
Yeah, thank you, Honorable. I think you have talked about the fact that we need enabling laws that can ensure that issues of access to financial services are being guaranteed. You have talked about infrastructure also, time that is taken for women to even access the financial facilities that are available. I also wanted you to look at how such kind of constraints then influence women's development and well-being, because I think sometimes when you look at access to financial services, it's not like automatic for people to connect, to say that if somebody doesn't have access to financial services, then some things in their life are being affected. What would you connect? How would you connect the two? The constraints that you have talked about and the well-being of the women, their own personal development.
You know, I think there's a simple answer to that. Money talks. And if money talks and money moves the world, then it means if you have money, if you have access to money, your relationship with politics, your relationship with the economy, your relationship in the social society standing also changes. So it has been found by several studies that women that have access to financial services, they are decision makers. They are easily welcomed to the table of decision making. They make decisions starting off at home, and then you start to see their importance, relevance in the society increase. But above from just being decision makers, even their participation away from just having the cash, seeing them in the market, seeing them in bigger economic participation, because I want to clarify this. When we talk about financial inclusion and access to financial services, for women, we shouldn't just be focusing on the micro aspect of it, which is smaller, less than $100, $500. But I want us to also focus on the larger side of it for women that are ambitious, more looking at bigger enterprises, bigger industries. So we see that participation in the economy just being better. And we know that when you have 50% of your population being the only productive one, then you'll only have 50% of production. But if you bring in the under 50%, you will even see economic growth, economic development really increasing. So it's crucial that we have women participate and have better access to financial services.
Thank you, Honorable. Let me go to Dr. Nyarazai. Dr. Nyarazai, when you look at women, I think we're talking about women that are being excluded from the formal financial system. And I'm just wondering to say, in terms of your own assessment, what could be some of the catalysts to ensure that financial inclusion strategies effectively reach out to all in the society? And all, we are talking about women, for example, men, of course, but at this point, we're talking about women. How do we ensure that everyone is participating, everyone is able to benefit from the formal financial system? What strategies can work?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Margaret. And it's great to connect, and congratulations for all the great work you do at Warwick, and amazing panelists. Thank you so much. And to the co-hosts of this event. I was looking forward to be coming to Malawi and joining in the market by eating chambo and enjoying the fish.
Most welcome.
Because financial inclusion starts by consuming and prioritizing where we put our money, which is where women are. So that was what I was expecting at the beginning. I'm looking forward to the visit. Anyway, you raise a very fundamental issue. It's a very fundamental question, which both in my work with ActionAid, but also within the African Union, we grappled with this issue and very much connecting with what the former minister.
Yeah, Dr. Nyarazai. We seem to have a
Yes.
technical hiccup. Are you able
Do
to
you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Margaret, and thanks to the co-hosts. And just to say, the question you raised is what we grappled with for almost 5 years, much longer, going back into Beijing, but just looking into the AU space, which resulted in the adoption of the AU decade 2020 to 2030 on financial inclusion. And I want to say what are some of the strategies and the underlying issues that we must address. First is that the area of economics and finance is embedded in the neoliberal policies and in patriarchy, and which totally excludes, which to a large extent excludes women. So first strategy is naming is norming. Why do we always, when we talk of women and our sisters who are farmers, I heard them speak earlier, we immediately say they are micro, they need micro. The word micro immediately positions women to the smallest denominator. Women, investing in women is always associated with micro. When you talk about women farmers, so we talk about microcredit, micro projects, micro savings and loans, micro this, micro that. Because we are already saying women cannot handle big and they are micro. So the first strategy is to deconstruct the patriarchal underpinnings. We talk of women smallholder farmers. Holding a small piece of land does not mean you are not productive. I'm calling from my village, I have a small piece of land, but with smart agriculture, you can produce more even on a small piece of land. So it's not about the quality and the quantity of land, it's about the entrepreneurial attitude towards what you use the piece of land for. But women are always associated with small farms, small scale farmers, something small. When we talk about women's funds in the bank, they start to talk about small windows. We need a window for women. Women don't need a window, they need a door. And African women, we are big, we are robust. We need a door to walk into, sit on the table, discuss. When it's a window, you can only peep in, you can only see, but you may not sit on the table and negotiate. So the first strategy is deconstructing and reconstructing the embedded patriarchal attitudes, which are then translated to policy and to products in the financial sector. Secondly, it's very important that we understand that financial inclusion is about availability, accessibility, and affordability. And the inclusion of women is so much integrated with women's social status in society. We have women, me. We seem to be independent and we have your national ID, but the domestic private determines how you access and participate in the economy. So at times, women's social status and dynamics at the household level determines their risk aversion. To what extent can you take a big loan without discussing with your spouse, your husband, your partner? Because the asset, even if it's yours, is considered to be shared asset within the family. So the private is political. The private dimensions of women's life. So when we talk about products around financial inclusion, and when women present themselves before a bank and raise some of these barriers, it's not just about collateral, it's also the underlying issues around ownership and patriarchy that is embedded on it. So it's just to do the sensitization and awareness. Indeed, the strategy around financial literacy and education. Let me come to education very fundamentally. I am hating this International Women's Day because of the numbers we have on child marriage and teenage pregnancy. Schools have been closed. If we don't have a pipeline of educated girls with financial literacy who are able to negotiate the economy, it's very difficult for us to have a critical mass of empowered women, because we would already have lost the opportunity when they were girls. So a critical strategy is keeping girls in school and the curriculum having great information around financial literacy, but also reaching out to the women in our economy now to also have access to information that enables them to negotiate. And lastly, it's the strategy around digital. COVID-19, Maggie, has just said, we're going digital. And digital demands a strategy that addresses the inequalities that exist between urban and rural, complexity of participation, complexity of access, digital money. So there is this whole range of strategy that we need around digital, which for Africa is even much more urgent now than before. So the question is not about leave no one behind. It's why are people in decision-making leaving others behind, because they know where it hurts, but also not taking the appropriate actions to resolve the issues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nyarazai Gumbo Nwanza. I think you talked about issues of micro, to say it's now time for us to question, to say why is it that when it comes to women, we just talk about micro issues, microfinance, and micro facilities. It's now time for us to move to talk about macro level. How do women fit into that? I think also another interesting thing that you are bringing is the issue of the private sphere, to say, okay, if a woman, for example, can access a loan, but then how do they go back to where they're coming from to convince their spouses to say, this is the loan that I've taken and this is what I can do with it. Thank you very much for those insights. At this point, I also want to call upon Quiver. I think just looking at the fact that we are an agricultural economy, and in Africa, most of the times we depend on agriculture, I think Quiver will come in just to talk about some of the factors, for example, that constrain women in terms of their participation in the agriculture sector, but also reaching their full potential in agriculture. I think in this case, we're talking about Malawi, but also talking about the continent of Africa. What are some of those constraints that women in agriculture find themselves they have to deal with when they are trying to advance?
Thank you very much, Maggie. And first of all, let me thank the previous speakers for your remarkable insights, which I both find inspiring and fully and wholeheartedly agree with. Nyaradza, you talk about deconstructing the language and moving away from patriarchy. And I think that is something that we have to do every day. We have to consistently challenge ourselves on that. To come to your question, Maggie, when looking at agriculture, I think you need to look at a number of different facets. So first of all, what is the context and what are the institutions within which people operate as farmers, as rural community members? What are the natural resources that people rely on for agriculture? What are their sources of vulnerability? What are the shocks that may affect them and what's their resilience to those shocks? What are the assets that they have available? And then lastly, what are their livelihood strategies? And every single one of these facets, every one of these dimensions is gendered. Men and women fundamentally experience their context in different ways, and the context impacts on them differently because of their gender. Access to ownership, control over resources, as previous speakers have said, and access to finance is deeply gendered. But we should never, I fully agree with Nyaradza, we should never see women as belonging in that part of society which is micro, which undermines their power and their potential. That should never happen. But the reality is that social norms affect every facet of agriculture: who can own what, who cannot own what, who can do something, who cannot do something, and fundamentally who makes decisions and who does not make decisions. Unfortunately and typically, women have lower levels of education, lower levels of control over decision making, fewer assets and less valuable assets, less access to finance, and also coupled with that, greater responsibility for domestic and reproductive work at the household level. So their roles are dictated by social norms, and therefore women are constrained from engaging, for example, in the more macro, scaled up, value-adding agriculture that could really empower and release them and enable them to participate not just in marketing, but also to participate as consumers, to participate in shaping the markets and in shaping them in manners which are inclusive of women and increasing their control over assets and crops as they increase in value. It's been said that the current agricultural development model across Africa, in Malawi, but even more globally, is gender blind, it's patriarchal, and it's indifferent to human rights, including women's rights. And I'm sorry to say that this is Trocare's experience, that in particular women farmers, women human rights defenders, women who are climate change champions who are trying to fight back against the structures that are maintaining them in these micro situations where they are almost looked down upon rather than celebrated for what they can contribute. That these systems are gender blind, patriarchal, and indifferent to human rights. But I think that is something that we can change. But I would posit that social norm change is the root of all change, and bringing about social norm change in agriculture is really powerful. It can be much more powerful than any isolated policy decision that attempts to address a particular dimension of gender inequality. And it is something that is required to go along with every policy decision that attempts to address gender inequality and productivity in agriculture. So I think things like deliberate investments of time, deliberate investments of resources in community mobilization, in peer-to-peer engagement with men as allies, engagement with community leaders and policymakers. These are all fundamental to changing the environment within which agriculture takes place and within which women can flourish. And I am minded, Maggie, of the work of your own organisation, which is very much about changing social norms and enabling women and women's power to be seen for the potential that exists within it.
Thank you, Quiver. I think when we are also talking about agriculture, there are also issues of climate change that come into play. To say how does then climate change affect agricultural productivity. And I think the video that we saw was capturing women that were able to explain what kind of risks, what kind of challenges they are facing in the light of climate change. These are women farmers. Just to mention that Trocaire is being funded by the Scottish government on a program which is tackling the climate change. And that program is community-led and is supposed to be building the resilience of the women. And it's also aimed at developing the capacity of communities to cope the impact and also adapt to climate change. So at least the women were able to explain how climate change comes into play. I was wondering to say, from your perspective, how do you see this climate change impacting on women differently from men? And also what can be done to address the impacts that come about because of climate change?
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. So I think it's very evident, and thank you very much to the women who spoke in those videos early, because it is their truth that really matters. And I think what we can see is that climate change impacts significantly on women, and it also exacerbates existing gender inequalities in the agriculture sector, but also beyond. So what we need is a much better understanding of the role of gender and gendered vulnerability in the agriculture sector if we're really going to effectively target gender equitable agricultural support to women, but also to men in order to help people adapt to climate change. When we talk about resilience and resilience to climate change, because climate change, unfortunately, is a fact, we can mitigate the worst impacts of it, but we really need to work very strongly at a national and at a global level to make sure that the world gets back on track with its Paris commitments. But at the most local level, resilience is fundamentally the ability to draw upon a set of capacities to deal with shocks and stressors, both before, during, and after a shock or a stress occurs. And these capacities to deal with shocks and stressors, they are different for women and men. They're different for people depending on their social status, their level of access to assets, their level of access to information. But there is a fundamental schism when it comes to women and men, because all of those initial underlying inequalities are there. The lack of access to education to the same degree, the lack of access to assets, the lack of control over assets, the lack of control over information and how you can use it. So unequal power relations between women and men do mean that the inequality that they experience in any environment is exacerbated in a context of climate change. So to give a concrete example, in countries like Malawi, we know very clearly climate change is negatively impacting the availability of water, especially surface water, which is the source of water for many rural communities. There is a social construct, which means that women have to provide domestic water for the family. And therefore, increasingly, women have to cover huge distances to collect water, which increases their workload, limits their engagements in other tasks that are strategic, like income generation and community leadership. Women are also traditionally responsible for food supply in the household. So when climate change results in disruption to crops and to harvest and results in food shortages, stress levels increase in the household. Food, energy, water stress, these all put women and girls at very high risk of sexual and gender-based violence. Now, acknowledging all of that, we also have to acknowledge that along with gender-specific roles that women also hold unique knowledge, which needs to be respected and seen for what it is and the value that it holds. And it needs to be effectively utilized in responding to and managing climate and disasters in families and in their communities. So I strongly believe that effective adaptation means that you have to consider the different needs of women and men, the different capacities that they have, the different priorities that they have. And you need to ensure that investments are targeted where they are needed most. Gender responsive approaches to agriculture and climate change are absolutely essential in achieving effective and sustainable development. And genuine support to women farmers, I believe, could unleash the potential of hundreds of millions to effectively reduce poverty and hunger while building countries' resilience to climate change. And to give one concrete example, Niger, a macro study was carried out there, and it identified that the product of not investing in women was 17% reduction in GDP. So I completely, going back to Niradzai's point, it is not about the micro, it is about women's power to transform societies and economies, and investing appropriately in women's farmers and in their ability to be resilient to climate change, but also to be more productive at scale means that you could add a huge amount to economies and societies as well.
Thank you, Quiver. There are a number of questions also that have come from the audience, but before we go into those, I wanted Pamela to come in. Pamela works at national level, trying to contribute to the policy environment so that it works out better for women and men, but also in this context, we're talking about women. I wanted Pamela to come in because I think the previous panelists have talked about national level also matters. So much as we work at the individual level, at community level, what should we do at national level for things to work out? So I wanted you to show us in terms of how do civil society organizations contribute to an enabling environment that increases equitable investment in women in the agriculture sector. Yeah. Okay.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but we can't hear Pamela. Thanks. No, we still can't hear you.
Technical team, can we sort this out? Okay, while we are waiting for technical team to sort it out, Honorable Bohora, I'm coming back to you. You already talked about the fact that women face challenges when it comes to financial services, but I was wondering to say, okay, from your own experience, what would you say are some of the women-centered strategies that can be considered to ensure that there's adequate resourcing so that we can achieve the sustainable development goals that we talk about? I think at this point, we're talking about sustainable development goals and how they should be achieved in our countries. But then if there's no resourcing, what happens? So in your own assessment, in your own view, what would be some of the women-centered strategies that can assist in ensuring that women are able to access the resources that matter so that we achieve the goals?
Thank you, but I have.
Are you able to hear? Honorable Bahoro?
I think.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great. So I was saying, I think I actually covered that aspect a little earlier on, around that we can do something about institutional issues, legislative matters that are holding women back. The issues of inheritance, of you can't go to a bank by yourself and all of that. Those are legislative issues, regulations that were put in place by men and can be removed by men. And it's part of gender mainstreaming, gender equity reforms, policy reforms that need to be put in place. You change all of those that we know are hindrances in women's participation. And then over and above that, we have to work on ensuring that our doing business environment generally is enabling and it's conducive, so that it doesn't take too long to start a business, it doesn't take too long to access government services, because we know the inherent nature of a woman's job is not just in the business, and it's also at home. So when you know that every hour that someone spends waiting to register a business or waiting at the bank, it takes away at home, you know you're already going to cause conflict. So what we need to do is to ensure that we use policies and we provide services in such a way that caters and empowers women that want to do both, that are active at home and want to be active in the business field. And that means speedier, faster, sensitive, gender-sensitive service delivery. And like I said, if the doing business environment is conducive and provides opportunities for all, you will find that our most vulnerable caters for our most vulnerable population, then you will find that it will cater for women, and it will be able to empower women to not only tap into financial access, but to be active in the economy. And then culturally, the issues that we have to start talking about the fact that we have been talking about women being part of the economy, being part of decision-making for centuries, for decades. And we need to ensure that that conversation no longer is seen as a side event. You know, it's no longer seen as a side event, but it's part of plenary discussions. When we're talking about economic empowerment, issues around gender mainstreaming should be front and center and shouldn't be put for the second day in the agenda as a side event where no one will be. We need to stop making women issues just for women, gender equity issues just for women. We need to see more men in panels like these. We need to see more women in other panels that talk about economic participation. Just as I wrap up, sorry, as I wrap up yesterday, about how in every panel we're seeing women, everyone is saying women, women stay, and every panel has a whole set of women panelists. And it is so peculiar because every other day in the year, we're told we do not have enough women to field as panelists. But all of a sudden on Women's Day, you have found these women. I would like to see that trend going on throughout the year to ensure that women's voices are heard and can influence decision-making and policy-making that can help to uplift women's livelihoods.
Thank you very much, Honorable. I have some questions that have come from the audience, and these are going to all the panelists. I think You can be intervening as you see fit. So the first question says, what should African leaders do to tackle the patriarchal notion that restricts women to micro businesses? I think it has come from Honorable there, it has come from Dr. Nyaradzai, even Quiver, to say that when we talk about women, most of the times, it's about micro issues. So what do we want our African leaders to do to move women from the micro level to macro level, where they're able to run macro level businesses? I don't know who is going to tackle it first.
I can jump in.
If I can jump in.
Okay. I'll yield to you.
I defer to my former minister.
Yes, Nyaradzai. Yes, Nyaradzai.
Yes, please. Yes, thank you. So first is just to see the former minister and the young leader there is what the governments should do. To dare to appoint competent women, including young women, so that women are not defined as only vulnerable and weak and micro, but women are also competent, able, and capable, and skilled, and knowledgeable. So that's the first thing they have to do. And so it was very powerful when they supported our sister Ngozi to be at the helm of WTO. Congratulations to her. We need more of that. We need more feminists, more women's rights advocates, more champions in the spaces of macro decision making. We also know that the AU had set already the 50-50 gender parity by the appointment of 5 women and 5 men in the commission. That's the standard. So Africa should not go back to the 30%. So we want to see the governors of our bank being 50% women, 50% men. We want to see the procurement boards, the national revenue institutes, the agricultural marketing institutions, the mining sectors. We want to see women in the critical decision making at all levels, the water boards in the village. You know, we want to see women at every level as a 50-50 target that is set in the Maputo Protocol. That's the first which needs to happen. The second, and I'm very passionate on this point because we are in COVID-19, when we talk about who is caring, who is providing care for COVID response, just as much as it was for HIV, it's the women. Whether it's the frontline health workers or is the self-isolation at home, which is woman-based care. But nobody is asking who is getting the tenders for health commodities. Which companies are supplying the face masks to all our public institutions? Who is providing the sanitizers? Who is providing the face shields? It's not the women. So procurement, we need affirmative action in the procurement sector as part of government strategic intervention, which puts money into the pockets of the female entrepreneur and the young entrepreneur in a way that really lifts the innovation which is happening in communities. I have seen thousands and thousands of women with their little sewing machines sewing the face masks that we use, the cloth ones, and they are not getting the tenders. It's charity. It's like, oh, community women's groups are contributing. They are not even accounted for. But
while we sort out the technical issue, I think we can now go to Pamela. I'm sure that
we need, yes, I think the last point is value addition. So thank you so much, Maggie.
Thank you. So we wanted to go to Pamela. I think you talked about the fact that at even higher level, leadership of women has to be visible. So I think Pamela is one of such kind of women that she's visible in the agriculture sector, where they're able to influence policy issues. So at this point, let me call Pamela to highlight what they have been doing as civil society network in dealing with issues of agriculture in Malawi, but also ensuring that the environment becomes enabling enough for women to participate. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I'm not sure at what point, because initially when I came, I was appreciating what the other speaker had said regarding the issues in the agriculture sector and the inequalities in terms of the disparities, despite the fact that, for example, in Malawi, 70% of smallholder farmers are women. And yet, when you look at the investments, there are so many disparities ranging from land, access to farm inputs, access to mechanization, access to irrigation. So in responding to all these challenges that are affecting women, there is a lot that civil society organizations are doing. And I'm privileged because my organization is a network of up to 70 civil society organizations. And year in, year out, we do some sort of survey to understand how each of those organizations is contributing towards the agriculture sector and specifically towards the development of women in the agriculture sector. So there are a number of initiatives that civil society are doing. First and foremost, research and policy analysis, because we need data and information to make decisions. So from time to time, civil society go into research on issues affecting women in the agriculture sector. This can be short or long term. And research findings are then disseminated to key policy officials through policy briefs or other publications, but they are also used for policy dialogues. And topics on research can include issues like land rights, issues of production and productivity, value chain analysis, issues of access to markets, and most recently, the impact of COVID in the agriculture sector and how it is affecting women. Civil society are also participating in policy formulation to ensure that issues affecting women are taken into account as policies and laws are made. For example, in Malawi, CSOs through my organization, CISANET, have participated in the formulation of the National Agriculture Policy and the National Agriculture Investment Plan, but we also continue to get involved in policy formulation processes for all the policies that are supporting the broader national agriculture policy. For example, recently we are looking at the seed policy, the seed bill, the fertilizer policy, the contract farming strategy, and such other policies. And the main thing is to ensure that as we are formulating these policies, issues that specifically affect women are taken into account and interventions or policy priorities are effectively addressing this. The other way that civil society are responding is through social accountability and transparency. So first, through being accountable, the CSO themselves are supposed to be accountable in terms of their own investments. You know, the Malabo Declaration requires mutual accountability and transparency. So you're not only holding government to account, but you're also supposed to provide data in terms of what you're doing, who you're targeting, and the geographical areas where you're working, the investments, and what kind of return are you getting out of those investments. So my organization, CISANET, is required to submit that data on the total contributions of civil society, and we are specifically required to mention how women are being impacted. Secondly, it's not only the CSOs that are holding themselves to account, but we also do a lot of work to hold government to account. So there are a number of things, for example, political monitoring processes, and these include national and local level budget consultation, analysis, tracking, and monitoring. And one of the key things that CSOs are doing is to make sure that they are advocating for gender responsive budgeting, both at the national level, but also at the local level. The other way through which we are holding government to account is through policy engagement meetings at national and at the local level, where issues that are coming out of research, issues that are affecting women in the agriculture sector are discussed and recommendations are made. We also participate in joint sector review meetings. These are supposed to be quarterly, they can be annually, and also sector working groups, where everybody is presenting what they have done. We are asking each other questions. We are identifying the gaps, and we are agreeing on recommendations to say this is what civil society must be doing, this is what government must be doing, and these are the contributions that the development partners can make. The other way that civil society are contributing is through evidence-based policy advocacy and lobbying. So it involves a number of things: issue analysis, where gaps are examined that are affecting investments of women, investments into women in the agriculture sector, policy dialogues, local level and national policy engagement that aim to highlight issues affecting women in the agriculture sector, but also interface meeting with parliamentarians, especially the committees on agriculture, budget and finance, and other relevant committees. And the idea is either to raise awareness on why certain bills must be passed. For example, right now we are working on the seed bill, the right to food bill, but also to push for the bills to be passed. So whenever we are meeting the parliamentarians, as I mentioned, 70% of smallholder farmers in Malawi are women. Special focus is always placed on issues affecting women and how formulating those laws is going to help them develop in the agriculture sector. And another way is through media outreach or campaigns. I'm sure you have noticed a lot of campaigns so many times throughout the year where key messages are shared. Even during this month, the Women's Month, we are talking about women in agriculture right now. The idea is to make sure that the environment is enabling and there are equitable investments for women in the agriculture. And finally, through implementation of projects that align to the national agriculture policy goals and directly support women farmers. And this project can include provision of inputs such as seed and fertilizer. It can include capacity strengthening on a number of agriculture related areas. It can also include provision of extension services, but also support to financial services and access to markets. In a nutshell, that's what civil society organizations are doing in Malawi to ensure that there are equitable investments to support women in the agriculture sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to the questions that came from the audience. And I want to leave it open to the panelists to pick up a question that you think you want to tackle. So another question that came was that what steps should women's rights NGOs take to deconstruct the cultural norms? So the cultural norms that, for example, hinder African leaders to graduate women into macro level, for example. The cultural norms that people are used to say women cannot go into non-traditional areas. The cultural norm which relegates women to the household, where women cannot go out and do businesses, for example. So the question is, what should women's rights NGOs do to construct that kind of cultural norm? Quiver, do you want to come in?
Okay, Maggie, thank you very much.
All right.
It's a really relevant question, and I think a lot of the questions come down to this fact that at a very fundamental level, at the level of the relationship between a man and a woman, be that a young woman and her father or her uncle, or be that a woman and her husband, it's really around what is the tolerance for women's freedom at that fundamental level. I believe that we need to acknowledge that any journey of transformation in terms of norms needs to be one that's considered and needs to be understood as something that is long-term. Norms are something that we hold very deeply. They're things that we can hold sometimes in spite of ourselves. We might want to believe something different, or we might want our behavior to match to a set of values which is different to our norms, but we are a product of our environment. And when we speak and think about patriarchy, I've often heard it said that patriarchy is not the shark in the water, it's the water we are all swimming in. So if we're going to change the entire environment, it has to be considered and it has to be long term. But I do believe that there are a couple of key elements to social norms change work that NGOs can do and are doing you know, this tremendous work happening in Malawi and across Africa, often by small women-led organizations. So it doesn't have to be something that comes down from the top by any manner or means, but things like helping women to, first of all, have confidence in themselves, increase their self-esteem, help them to understand that they have power within themselves, and to understand that as a positive and a really strong force for change, but also to help men to come on board as allies and to see that empowering women is not a zero-sum game, that everyone gains from female empowerment, everyone gains from gender equality. So bringing men on board as allies, men as change makers, as influencers within their own society is incredibly powerful, but always making sure that we are giving primacy to the fact that women have historically and traditionally been marginalized and excluded. So it's their voices that need to be heard. So any conversations around women and women's empowerment and gender equality need to give primacy and space to women's voices so that their experiences can be articulated. But I think investing in long-term social norm and behavior change programs is absolutely key, and it should underpin most other programs that are more instrumental, that are more around changing a framework, changing a policy, or changing a practice or the way things have done. Because unless we embed that in norms, then you know, they might work to a degree or they might completely fail. And that goes for senior level political leaders as well, who also need to go on a journey of transformational change if fundamentally their attitude is to exceptionally accept women in a leadership role, as opposed to consistently support all women to develop into leadership roles.
Thank you. And the other question that I wanted to ask from the audience, that's one of the questions that has come from the audience, is concerning the COVID-19 context. And for this one, I was thinking that maybe Honorable Bohoro can tackle that. Also looking at the fact that she's experienced in the area of financing, because the question says, in the context of COVID-19 and climate change, what challenges and opportunities are there to strengthen the funding for gender equality work? Because I think we have been challenged by the pandemic, and you find that levels of funding sometimes have gone down, and yet the needs on the ground are so many. So what should we hope for? Is there any hope in terms of funding for gender equality work?
Yeah, I think, actually, I know I've seen a lot of our development partners who've been involved in some work with some development partners that are focusing on building back better and realizing that the best way to build back better is by targeting the more vulnerable groups. And there has been a flow of capital into the continent that is looking at women, young people, farmers, and to provide support to those. So there's been a little bit of movement in that space. I can't particularly say there's advice to the women groups, but advice to governments is that this is the time to put money into those groups, into the groups that are vulnerable to poverty, that are poor, that are in the informal sector. This is the time to try to uplift them, to inject more capital, to ensure that you are not going to increase that band of people who are poor post-COVID. So what we're talking about here is to avoid economic scarring, and all of the building back better policies need to be focused on women, on their working capital right now, need to be focused on on creating support to tap into digital spaces and so forth. So we have to decide right now the kind of economies we want to see post-COVID, and that is really where we should be investing. In. And some of the work that we've done in the last year has been really talking to that. Just to give an example, trying to find out what can and cannot be said in this context. But to give an example, there's a project in the informal sector that is targeting women that have been affected by COVID, whose businesses can no longer run because of COVID. So we give them a little bit of a sustenance. The recommendation is for them to be given sustenance income, and then to have like an injection of capital for them to jumpstart their businesses once lockdowns and curfews stop. So that is some of the policies that I think can be put in place to just ensure that we don't have any increase of women in poverty post-COVID. Because at the moment, the statistic is a little scary. It says, 27 million women, African women, are now back into poverty because of COVID in the last year. And that is a very scary figure.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we are running out of time now for our discussions. So I wanted last word from each of the panelists. Can I start with Dr. Nyarazai? Your last word in 30 seconds.
Thank you. Thank you so much. In 30 seconds, we should and we must be part of the global discussions and influence the decisions our governments are taking on borrowing. We know that with COVID-19, our countries would be borrowing for vaccines, and we must ensure that we must push that the discussions, the borrowings with the World Bank, with the IMF, the arrangements, does not reintroduce the austerity measures, which would cut expenditure to health, to education, and to the women in communities who are producing. So I think that is the first that we need it's critical, and so having the feminist economists is so critical, is the role of women's organizations and civil society is to be that watchdog in that space. And I also think that building back, I want to build the future and not back, because the past had so many inequalities and fault lines. So let's take COVID-19 as an opportunity to build the best of our future. Because if you build back, we are building back into the fault lines which have existed, which includes inequalities by gender. And lastly, that it's critical that we talk about male responsibility and male accountability. The responsibility and the accountability of men, they are the majority in decision making. Investing in women for financial inclusion is not charity. It's good economics. It's not charity, it's not benevolence, it's the right thing to do for our economies to thrive, to survive, and for us to have a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So investing in women is not charity, but it's the right thing to do. Thank you for that. Quiver, do you have any last word in 30 seconds?
Thank you very much. So in summary, I think we need to address gender and social norms as fundamentals. We need to invest in women's leadership at all levels of society. We need to really focus on removing the structural institutional barriers to women's participation in leadership and women's participation in decision making. And then fundamentally and practically, we need to increase women's access to and control over productive resources, including land, water, and finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Pamela, any last word in 30 seconds?
I wanted to mention that sometimes CSO support can be fragmented, where more women are receiving more support than others. So CSO must make sure that they are coordinated and they are collaborating in their efforts as they contribute towards an enabling environment to.
Okay.
Our take of that.
Would you have someone to pick them?
Our technical team, I hope, is resolving that.
No problem. The zodiac, if you know zodiac. That's around where I am. So if you come after lunch, I'll be home. I can give them it.
Okay, Pamela, you can go ahead.
Okay, so I was saying CSO support can sometimes be fragmented, where support in terms of geographical location and number of beneficiaries can only depend on availability of resources, but also donor preferences. And this can result into some women receiving more support than others. So there's always need for collaboration and coordination as CSOs synergizing their efforts towards contributing to enabling environment to increase equitable investments for women. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. And Honorable Bohoro, your last word in 30 seconds.
My last word is gender equity.
Yes, can you hear us?
Issues. Yes, I can hear you.
All right, okay.
My last word is that gender equity issues should not be side event issues and should be plenary. And I would like to see more and more men participating in discussions around gender equity, And I hope that this trend, as I said earlier, this of having more women in panel discussions in decision-making on Women's Day will ripple out throughout the year, and we will start to see the change in representation. So that is my final word. Thank you so much again for inviting me, and it's been a pleasure being with all of you on this panel.
Thank you very much for your participation. I think just to summarize what is coming out of the panel is that issues of women in terms of their access to financial resources need to be taken seriously. We have been talking about micro loans, but now we should be able to move from micro loans to macro so that women are able to engage in bigger businesses that can have higher returns. Issues of education has also come in to say these are important issues that we should be looking at. Get women educated, get girls educated, and government should invest in such kind of education. Issues of the law and policy, also very important, that we need to have the right laws and policies that are going to address issues of women and issues of gender in our countries. Issues of patriarchy, questioning patriarchy, interrogating patriarchy in terms of how it affects women and how we can challenge it so that women are liberated and do a right thing for their own development. Issues of COVID, to say much as it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity where we can come in and have more resources, have more things that are innovative that can actually help women to go further. The issue of digitization has also come in to say, how do we then put women into those spaces? Issues of debt. Our countries are borrowing now to cater for vaccines. Are we monitoring? Are our countries being accountable to us? Very important for us to look at those kind of issues. Issues of gender equity should not be in the peripheral, should be in the center stage, so that issues of women are discussed where things are being discussed, where decisions are being discussed and are being made. Issues of women's leadership, that women have to take part in everything that concerns their lives. So there are so many things that were highlighted from this panel. And let me thank the panelists that we had on behalf of Trocaire, that we really value your contributions that you have made to this discussion. And it's our belief that whatever has been raised here will be taken forward so that in the end, it's women that are going to benefit in terms of financing, in terms of agriculture development in our countries in Africa. Thank you very much for joining us. A round of applause for our panelists, please, as they go. Yeah. At this point, I would like to explain that the conference is also giving awards. Awards of recognition for the different roles that individuals, that institutions are playing when it comes to issues of gender equality. At this point, I would like to say that in this session, our awardee is none other than Standard Bank Malawi. So I just want to say something about Standard Bank. So Standard Bank is the winner of the champion of equality in terms of the corporate sector. And it has been recognized that since 2017, Standard Bank has been welcoming school-going girls from across the country of Malawi in its selected branches and service centers as part of celebrating International Day of the Girl Child. The initiative is officially held on October 11, save for 2020, when it was held virtually on a separate date due to the COVID-19 pandemic inconveniences. For that particular day, girls have a rare opportunity to experience the working environment within the bank. For the past 2 years, Standard Bank has partnered with other companies and organizations who have also hosted a contingent of girls in their respective workplaces. Standard Bank utilizes March 8 every year to commemorate International Women's Day through various programs that are aimed at empowering women within their careers and communities. For instance, this year the bank is hosting a virtual business masterclass series workshop to empower women-led businesses so that they remain resilient and innovative through the recent economy downturn. In partnership with UN Women, Standard Bank is implementing a smart agriculture project targeting 10,000 rural women farmers in groundnuts production. The 3-year project, funded by the bank to the tune of 340 million, aims at helping the women farmers adopt modern green technologies in farming and finding better markets for their produce. Standard Bank runs a mentorship program for girls in rural areas through motivational talks and donation of learning materials. The bank has previously used proceeds from its signature event, Be More Race, to reach out to these girls. Standard Bank has various internal initiatives aimed at giving women more opportunities to grow their careers and impact both within the bank and in communities. So every year, there are several mentorship programs targeting women across all levels of authority within the bank. So at this point, I want to call upon Jeanette to present to Standard Bank as the winner of the champion of equality in terms of the corporate sector. Can we, yes, a round of applause for them. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, yes, thank you. Yeah, so we are now coming towards the end of our session. At this point, I would like to introduce Ruth Negash. She is the Chief Executive Officer for COMESA Federation of Women in Business. She's the one that is going to make the closing remarks. But before she comes on the podium, Ruth holds a master's degree in education management and leadership and a bachelor's degree in physiology in medicine. Postgraduate certificates in advanced project management, human resource management, training and development, and health and safety. Prior to her current position, Ruth was the head manager of the mining training and development program for a Bisha mining share company in Eritrea. Currently, she holds the position of the Chief Executive Director of the COMESA Federation of National Associations of Women in Business in Eastern and Southern Africa. Her leadership role is to manage, strengthen, encourage, promote, link, and represent women in business, especially women in Africa, through their national associations for the 21 African COMESA member nations. With more than 20 years of experience in managing change and leading teams across multiple sectors in development, education, health care, and the mining sector, she has developed a clear, logical mind with a practical approach to problem solving, productivity, and focus on delivering results. Ruth is eager to form linkages with productive partners and also enjoys overcoming challenges and has a genuine interest in developing communities and nations through upscaling grassroots business ownership. She believes that successful economic empowerment for women and youth results from organizing and building the capacity of each businesswoman, partnering with the public and private sectors for policy advocacy and access to markets and inclusive financial systems to achieve sustainable economic growth. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Ruth. She's going to give us her closing remarks. Thank you. Yeah, it's fine. What do you prefer? Yeah, you can come.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Dear Honorable Minister of Gender, Dr. Patricia Cagliati, Conference Organizers for Equality, the Team for Feminist Macroeconomics Alliance, Malawi, Country Director of Trocaire, Ms. Jeanette Wiginans, apologies for the name, CONFIB Malawi Chair, Ms. Barbara Banda, Senior Government officials present, dear panelists and participants of the conference, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I feel honored to make a few remarks at the closing ceremony at this first Africa Gender Equality Conference. I would like to congratulate you all for being able to keep the Africa Gender Equality agenda afloat and finding time to participate in this event despite the challenges of COVID-19. Chairperson, it's a pleasure to talk about a topic that's close to my heart, gender equality. Before I focus on this theme, allow me to give you a quick review about the CONFIB for the benefit of some participants who might not be able to be familiar with our organization, COMESA, Federation of National Associations of Women in Business. CONFIB, formerly known as FEMCOM, was established by the COMESA heads of state and governments in 1993 in pursuance of the articles in the COMESA Treaty of 28, 154 and 155, which recognizes the role of women in agriculture, industry, and trade, positively affecting the economic and social transformation of our region. CONFID during the last few years have worked closely with its partners in promoting entrepreneurship, development in financial, non-financial, public, private, associative, and freelance businesses by organizing and strengthening linkages and building women's capacity in entrepreneurship and finding access to markets while innovatively running and growing their businesses. Also, a great deal of effort is being exerted in creating an enabling environment for women by working hand in hand with governments and policymakers to remove the gender-specific barriers that businesswomen face. This, however, is a long-term endeavor requiring everyone's effort to foster women's economic empowerment for a greater gender equity. Ladies and gentlemen, in line with the treaty of the 7th COMESA Summit of Heads of State and Governments held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in May 2002, adopted the COMESA Gender Policy and the Gender Declaration of, as a follow-up A revised gender policy was adopted in October 2016 in Antananarivo in Madagascar, advocating for equal and full participation of women in regional trade and all COMESA activities, elimination of gender inequalities, and ensure women's economic empowerment and equal access to the control of resources and opportunities in our region. Access to affordable finance through partnerships with banking institutions to establish targeted financial credit linkages for women and promote savings schemes. Women's access to entrepreneurship training and capacity building, creation of information and networking platforms, promotion of partnerships in the private sector, cooperating partners, civil society, international and regional institutions, and other stakeholders. Chairperson, let me briefly give you some of my thoughts on women in leadership, achieving an equal future in the COVID-19 world. In addition to these challenges, COVID-19 pandemic has also wreaked havoc as it has not spared the already vulnerable women-owned businesses due to the measures put by the national COVID-19 teams to prevent the spread of the coronavirus in the communities. Transit, trade, and transport across the region has been seriously affected, leading to disruption of regional supplies, economically basic consumables such as food and clothing. Although women are resilient and innovative for survival, reviving their businesses will require the efforts of the whole society, including government bodies, development partners, local community leaders, and other businesses to come up with local-based technologies to avail a variety of solutions for efficiency, such as infrastructure, power, communication facilities, access to safe and secure transport systems. In order to achieve the equal future for COVID-19 world, there is a need to also do a women's inclusion in the digital economy for finance and commerce. Currently, a large percentage of women in low-income groups are deprived of access to formal financial services because they are not considered creditworthy. Hence, women are not able to grow and expand their businesses. Allow me to say that the absence of collateral is not an indicator to show that women are not creditworthy. I would say that most women are creditworthy as they are involved in complex financial processes, such as managing minimum household budgets and taking part of informal home-based institutions such as the village savings and loan groups, also known as the Banking Conde in Malawi, but they're also existing in every part of Africa, in every small village, in every community. This is an evidence to show that women are expert money managers. We need to note that this is the right time to invest in digital finance inclusion, as it delivers cost-saving digital facilities to reach the financially excluded and underserved populations in our countries. It will allow them to easily utilize the facilities at an affordable cost and create sustainable relationships with the financial providers. Also, delivering financial services through technological innovations, including via mobile money, online banking, and digital apps, is not only the new trend to help Africa to take an economic leap, but also it will be a catalyst for a diverse set of other financial services, including credits, insurance, savings, loans, and literacy on how to use these financial facilities. Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, there is a need to ensure that women have access to electronic digital networking platforms as well, including the e-commerce. Due to 2019 COVID, we have a problem in the whole region on how women can do their businesses, especially in COMESA. We have a number of platforms to tackle this. We have the 50 Million African Women Speak platform, which is providing access in the continent, content information, improving the ability to businesswomen to network nationally, regionally, continentally, to access the financial and non-financial services for growing their businesses. Recently, the African Union launched in Africa the e-commerce platform called Sokuku. COMFWIB is also progressing the signing of the MOU with the AE Trade so that women can take advantage of the Sokuku platform, becoming primary users and beneficiaries of this newly integrated platform that provides financial logistical support at the grassroots level across the whole African continent using the African products. Women require support to connect to such platform as the cost of internet is hindering factor to accessing these platforms. Governments can intervene by sourcing competitive partnerships with internet providers and also subsidizing diverse internet services to avail affordable internet access for women and other vulnerable businesses. Support for women cross-border traders in Africa comes and involves with specifically the borders of our nations. Our COMESA statistics shows that the region, 70 to 80% of individual cross-border traders are women. However, most of the border areas in the region lack basic infrastructure to cater for the safety, security, and other needs of the small-scale women traders. Women traders face several risks and challenges, including theft, unnecessary charges, verbal violence, harassment, and sexual abuse. Very often, they also need to carry heavy sacks of merchandise on long distances due to lack of affordable transport and insufficient storage facilities. COMESA, for instance, is implementing a proper border infrastructure and a project working closely with the member states, which is focused on one-stop border post. Constructing, upgrading the gender-sensitive sanitation facilities, and upgrading the sustainable basic health centers at the targeted border posts. The project is also upgrading and building border market facilities, warehouses, and storage facilities, setting up trade centers, trade zones at the target borders, and facilitating the use of simplified trade regime and with the use of technology. In promoting conducive gender responses business and environment, there is a need to develop deliberate and consistent policies conducive to women in business. When promoting business linkages, especially lead companies in the value chains, intermediary buyers and suppliers, taking into consideration gender mainstreaming as primary objectives. Inclusivity requires proactive involvement of government and lead companies. Market information should be provided on an equal basis to all value chain players to avoid women traders being manipulated by intermediaries or lead companies in the value chains. Ensure that the knowledge of technologies required to meet quality and sanitary standards and access by women is led. Chairperson, the tailor-made businesses and advisory services of women, there is a need to building a capacity for women entrepreneurs so they link with each other and strive to build and manage sustainable businesses. This is being done through the provision of businesses and incubation services to add value in developing standardized quality products for competitiveness, as well as connecting them to markets, providers of finance, mentors, and coaches. Through the COMFOI projects, positive impacts such as formation of cooperatives and startup businesses are being recorded. Through this provision of COMFOI incubation services, businesswomen have benefited access to credit, capacity building on marketing, product testing, branding to meet the export standards, and learn about the product labeling, packaging, branding, and barcoding. In conclusion, on a positive note, the incubated entrepreneurs in the member states have seized this opportunity of being trained and having access to equipment to produce and supply the needed goods and services to be competitive and expand their existing businesses or do startups. I have no doubt in my mind that the continental economic integration agenda will be achieved by women's participation. However, we must ensure that women are equipped with the necessary resources, skills, opportunities to start and grow their businesses. With cooperative leadership and dedication building capacities, aligning policies and forming opportunities with business-to-business linkages of women entrepreneurs in the region and also internationally, we'll be able to achieve an equal future in a COVID-19 world. Businesswomen are now more than resilient than ever and also overcome many mountains of gender inequalities. But we must hold hands and be working together on this. I thank you and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Negashi. With her remarks, we come to the end of this session. In a special way, on behalf of Trocaire, the host of this session, I would like to thank everyone that was able to participate in this session, both in the studio, but also virtually. It has been a very interesting session, very interesting issues that have come out. And I'm sure that as we continue with the conference, more issues will come, which will add value to what has already been discussed in this session. Otherwise, thank you very much.